we shouldn't have to secure a spot for ourselves in heaven while a spot has already been secured. Because the moment you got saved, the moment you accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior, is the moment that place secured or was secured. The only thing is, I don't think, well, I'm not a theologian, and while right now I want to say I don't think that you could lose your spot in heaven, I don't think that that would completely be honest of me. Because many people maintain the belief that they have at some point lost their salvation. That is why so many of us come back to Christ, right? So I feel like this is one of those where it would be so interesting to have another person on the podcast whom I would have this conversation with. This would really be interesting, because right now as I'm talking about this, I have so many conversations in my head. I have so many rebuttals as well. I have so many agreements as well. It's just really insane. But yeah, I hope that you get my point, that while we are saved by grace now, ours is to, in a sense, maintain it, because we do fall short. But that is why there's room for repentance. And while I say that is why there's room for repentance, I am reminded by a saying that sin is only fun for a season. It's not fun forever. So I suppose that is also why we come back to Christ. That is how we are saved by grace. That, okay, we have had this certain amount of fun outside God. Now it's time to have fun within God's house, under God's umbrella. And perhaps, in a sense, that may be a rite of passage. But I think that that may probably be a podcast for another day. So just to continue with this, is I wanted to share maybe a personal experience where I was reminded by grace. I don't know if this could actually work, but I feel like there's so much grace every day in the little things and in the big things. We see it and we don't see it, and sometimes it does not look like a gracious thing. But just the day before yesterday, on Friday. So I told you that I recently started a new job. This is something that's also going to be in my vlog. I'm just not sure when I'm going to upload the vlog. I decided to use a taxi for the first time to work. So I have in the past used a taxi, but I've only ever used a taxi twice in the past 3 years. So I usually Uber to places, and just because it's safer, and I wasn't really like, there was no reason for me to like ever use a taxi. Also, I'm scared to use a taxi type of thing, like, you get that. The first time I had to use the taxi, I was still staying on campus, and there was a taxi strike. I got an Uber. I couldn't get in the Uber. The driver just literally, he did a U-turn by the campus gate, and he was like, yeah. And then I was forced into a taxi. I used the taxi. They left us in the middle of nowhere, and I was like, yeah, I'll never ever use a taxi again. The second time was when I used the bus, and I was with someone, so I felt safer, and they had knowledge of having used the taxi before, experience of having used the taxi before, so that wasn't really traumatic for me. However, yesterday, of course, now I don't know where to get taxis, right? Because those were taxis to Belleville. I've never had to take a taxi to N1 City. So I wasn't planning on taking a taxi. I was planning on taking a bus until I found out that there are no buses to the specific place that would pass by the route I was on. So then what had happened was I got onto a taxi to Belleville, and basically my bag wasn't properly zipped. A couple of things fell out, had to pack them real quick, get in the taxi. I get a car. The taxi is full. Where am I supposed to sit? So I had to sit on the floor. And apparently this is like standard thing. Like if, I don't know, I think 17, 16, I don't know how many seats a taxi has. But basically they like, oof, when you think overload, that is overload on steroids. They overload the taxis. I sat on the floor, on the taxi floor, until I got to the station. When I got to the station or the rank, dude, there were so many lines. I did not know which line it was. On the other hand, I'm worried that I'm going to be late and all of that. And I asked people like, okay, which taxi is it? People also got confused because the lines were also getting messed up. I asked one of the conductors or drivers I know. They told me which taxi to get on. Okay, finally got on the taxi, still uneasy, first experience, I don't know what's happening. So then he drove. We were on the road for so long. And mind you, I had left my house at 6:30 thinking that I would arrive on time for work at 8, right? So he drove to a point where I was actually like the only person in the taxi, and I was like, okay, is this the part we actually go to N1 now? Kept asking, are we going to N1 now? Probably like on the 5th attempt was when he was like, yeah. And then he left me in the middle of nowhere. At that point, when I tell you that I could not help myself, like a tear literally dropped, and he saw that I couldn't help myself anymore. I couldn't keep it back. And that's when he said, just walk up the bridge, you'll see the mall. At that point, I was so heartbroken. And right now that I say that, I actually still feel sad. I was so heartbroken at that point. I was getting in a position to Uber or just request the ride to Uber or Bolt or InDriver, whatever made sense in the moment, because at this point I was like, I am only using a taxi because I realized that if I Uber every day like I have the past 2 days, there's going to be days where I'm not able to make it to work, right? And at that point I walked up the bridge, and that's when I saw the mall. I thought of Ubering in but it was like the main road or highway situation. I don't know what you call that road, but it was so busy. The cars were like passing on the side and I was scared. But I kept walking. It got to a point where I was just walking in the road with tears that I could not hold back. And all I wanted to do was get to work. I remember calling my mom when I got to the taxi rank, and I'm like, I don't think I want to work anymore. I'm like, I know that I wanted this opportunity, but do I really want it? Because I was thinking, I need to work, but I have no immediate need to work. I could always go back home, right? So I went. I think this may be the most personal I've ever gotten on any of these podcasts now that I realize it. But I don't want to make this podcast too long, so I think that there will be a part 2 of how we're saved on grace. But just to finish this off, I think I should finish the story off first. Continued walking, got to work. I was 26 minutes late. Luckily I had already contacted my reporting manager, told her that, yeah, I don't know where I am and I'm using a taxi for the first time. I might be late. I got to work, and when I got to work, I was still crying. And mind you, the show goes on, right? The show goes on. But one of my biggest takeaways from that moment, also the people I work with were actually, they're very nice. I think about 3 of them personally came and like asked what was going on. And yeah, the rest of the day was just a really beautiful day. And I used the taxi back home. I was with someone from work, and yeah, so on my way back home, before we got into a taxi, because we're trying to figure out which taxi is it that I am getting into, because I'm the only person from Belar, right? There was like the taxi conductors or one of the taxi drivers. I'm telling them where I am going and where I am from. And now it became a language issue, just because my first language, hear this, I'm not saying my home language, I'm saying my first language is, well, I did English as home language in high school, but that's not the point. I just normally speak English. It comes naturally. And to realize that in my adult life, I still have to deal with people who make you feel like a snob, who make you feel bad for being raised the way you were raised, people who make fun of your use of language. It's not like we don't know any native languages. It's just a matter of this language is the one language that most people understand. And just because I speak differently from you and may have a different accent from the one which you have, does not mean that I think of myself as superior compared to the next person. I just speak that way. I was afforded the privilege to be able to go to schools where I got inducted, in a sense, if I could use that word, to speak a certain way. It has nothing to do with who I am as a person, I suppose. It is a part of me. And when that person was like, like, why aren't you speaking? Why aren't you speaking isiXhosa? I was taken aback because, firstly, why would you assume that I speak isiXhosa? And I was like, no, I don't speak that language. And while I was like, I got so annoyed, but I realized that I need this person to be gracious to me because he actually knows what's going on here. And I was like, what if I do not speak isiXhosa? And you know how taxi drivers are. He was very rude about it. And I was like, no, Dimtswana. And then that's when he was like, how do we start? And that was literally the only thing he could say. And then he was like, isiXhosa. Umxhosa and I was like, no, I'm not. That's when I got to tell him that I'm Dimtswana. And basically, I had to speak in isiXhosa, and while that's not bad, of course there were some words in English that I was using because I could not find the Xhosa word for it. And then the next person explained to him, and I think that my Xhosa is pretty average. I can say some things. It's just a matter of like, don't expect me to speak as quick as any other Xhosa person. I'm not fluent, I'm average. And yeah, he went to go explain to the other drivers because it seemed like he wasn't going to be the one driving the taxi, of which he actually wasn't. Then he called me. I went to him and then explained again where I was going, and then this time he was actually like, yeah, I also speak English, so let's speak now. And I was like, dude, like, do you realize what I mean when I say people are presumptuous? Like, just because I'm not, it was just really wild, because why did you have to do that? Why did you have to do that? Why would you have to take me back to that place where I remembered myself being discriminated against, in a sense? Okay, that's a very big word, but where I was discriminated against because I never quite actually fit in with one particular group of people, because I was either too black or too colored. Why did you have to put me back in a place where I was staying in Nagasi, but I did not look like a person who stays in Nagasi, or that my mannerism is not like that of a person who stays in Nagasi? Why did you have to put me back in a place where I was a coconut? Why did you have to put me back in a place where I had an accent? Why did you have to put me in a place where you belittle the person I am and make me feel like the opportunities I've been afforded was somewhat bad? And sometimes we think that these are things that we can just go over, but you realize why grace is so important. And while we were talking about how we are saved by grace in a Christian or biblical context, in this case, you get to realize that maybe we need to give each other grace. Maybe we need to be gracious towards each other, extend grace towards each other. Because the things that we trigger in each other's lives are things that maybe some of us are trying to grow out of and forge our own realities and own identities, and not have the person who I was 10, 16 years, 21 years, 19 years, however long ago that was, shadow the adult I am right now. And this is why it is so important that before we understand how we are saved by grace, that we understand what grace is. And that is basically tending to each other's feelings. Yes, we live in a society that is too sensitive. But have we ever thought of having just the right amount of sensitivity? It's one thing to blurt out something to a person whom you know, because you already have an audience for the things that you will say that you know that may be politically incorrect or whatever the case may be, but there is no intention towards it, no malicious intent towards it. But then to blurt something out to a stranger is an offense. To blurt something out to a stranger that is inappropriate is violence. Whether you mean something by it or you don't mean something by it, you don't know what the person has been holding on to. And you're here being ungraceful. And yeah, so he eventually did help. I got in a taxi. The taxi was overcrowded, but I made it home alive, and tomorrow we try again. And in that moment, one thing I got to realize was, or rather one thing that I appreciated, was that there has been so much grace in my life. I remember getting on a call. No, my aunt texted how my day was. I basically told her everything, and I was like, but my biggest takeaway from this situation is that what I went through is what the average South African goes through. That this is literally how people live every day. People wake up at odd hours to go to work. They get rude people. They literally have to use public transport from wherever it is that they're coming from. And they get in these situations. And the fact that I have been Ubering for the past 3 years, of course I wasn't working, but you get the point. And that this is literally people's primary transportation, primary mode of transportation, is actually really insane. It's actually really insane. Sure, it's becoming mine now, but to see that there are people who rely so much on taxi drivers, because I was in a position where I could Uber. I just realized and had to be honest with myself and realize that it doesn't make sense for me to Uber, because by the time I get paid, I'm working at a loss. So basically, we could safely say I would just be a volunteer at work. So it was actually really wild, but that's when I got to realize that I have lived a privileged life, because I have never been in a dire need to use a taxi. Sure, back home I used taxis, but it wasn't a big deal. It's just a matter of like going to the mall, and I prefer smaller taxis anyway. So that's easy. For the past 2 years, pretty much the same situation. Yeah. Oh, I need to go there on this certain date. I can do that. It's not something that I'm doing for the entire month. So I can actually afford to do that. But then when you realize that this is how people live every day, you get to have a different perspective and appreciation for the lives that people lead. And I hope that this has not only provided clarity on how we are saved by grace, but that it has also allowed a new perspective, or rather introduced a new perspective on what grace is. There will definitely be a part 2 of this, because I feel like this is a bit too long. It took an unexpected turn, but we're still going to continue the chat on how we're saved by grace in episode 48. So yeah, we're so close to 50, you guys. We're so close to 50 episodes of Macked the Podcast. So if you're listening on Everything Mackenzie, please do subscribe. Please do tell your friend to tell your friend to tell their aunt to tell their son's aunt about this podcast. Please. I'm trying to get somewhere here. What I have in store for this channel is big. But anyway, a girly is a corporate girly now. So I can't tell you where I work, because something policy. I'm trying to like understand company policies. So until I fully understand that, I'll let you know. But I'll probably like leave a couple of details in my vlog. I don't want to take away vlog material and then I'm just like, oh yeah, I said everything in the podcast, now I have nothing to say in this episode. So yeah, enjoy the rest of your Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, whatever day you're listening on. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening. I'm sending you much love and light. I'm your host, Marlies Mackenzie, and this has been Macked the Podcast. The visuals have been on Everything Mackenzie, and the audio has been on Macked the Podcast. Stay gracious, stay blessed. Sending you love and light.